Chapter 7. Along with the intensifying wind, the sky darkened from the west, and the clouds, approaching in waves, extinguished the constellations one after the other. The dragon went out, the winter maiden went out, and the 7 goats went out. The eye, which shines brightest and longest, went out. The edge of the horizon lit up with short-lived flashes of lightning. Thunder rolled with a dull rumble. The wind abruptly intensified, blowing dust and dry leaves into their eyes. The unicorn neighed and sent a mental signal. Ciri understood immediately what he wanted to say.
"There is no time to lose. Our only hope is in a quick escape, to the right place and the right time. We must hurry, Star Eye."
"I am the master of worlds," she recalled. "I am of the elder blood. I have power over time and place. I am of Lara Doran's blood." Ihuarahuax neighed, urged them on. Kelpie echoed him with a long drawn-out snort. Ciri put on her gloves. "I'm ready," she said. A buzzing in her ears, a flash and brightness, and then darkness. The water in the lake and the early evening silence bore the curses of the Fisher King, who sat on his boat, jerking and tugging the line, trying to free a lure caught on the lake bottom. A dropped oar thudded. Nimu cleared her throat impatiently. Conwiramures turned away from the window and then bent over the etchings. One of the boards in particular caught her eye. A girl with windswept hair riding a black mare rearing up. Beside her, a white unicorn, also rampant, its mane blown around like the girl's.
"I think that's the only fragment of the legend that historians have never quibbled about," commented the novice, unanimously regarding it as a fabrication and a fairy tale embellishment or a delirious metaphor. And painters and illustrators, spiting the scholars, took a liking to the episode. "Look, prithee, each picture is Ciri and the unicorn. What do we have here? Ciri and the unicorn on a cliff above a sea beach. And here, if you please, Ciri and the unicorn in a landscape like something from a drug-induced trance, at night beneath 2 moons.
Nimu said nothing.
In a word,
Conwiramures tossed the boards onto the table.
Everywhere it's Ciri and the unicorn.
Ciri and the unicorn in the labyrinth of the worlds. Ciri and the unicorn in the abyss of times.
Ciri and the unicorn,
interrupted Nimu, looking at the window, at the lake, at the boat and the Fisher King thrashing around in it.
Ciri and the unicorn emerged from nothingness like apparitions, suspended over some lake or other. And perhaps it's constantly the same lake, one that spans times and places like a bridge, at once different, but nonetheless the same. I beg your pardon? Apparitions.
Nimu wasn't looking at her.
Visitors from other dimensions, other planes, other places, other times. Apparitions that change someone's life. That also change their own life, their own fate, unbeknownst to them. For them, it's simply another place. Not that place, not that time. Once again, one more time in a row, not that time. Nimu?
Conwiramures interrupted with a forced smile.
It's me who's the dream reader, let me remind you. I'm the expert on dream visions and oniroscopy. And all of a sudden, you begin to prophesy, as though you saw what you're talking about in a dream.
The Fisher King, judging by the sudden intensity of his voice and his cursing, had failed to unhitch the lure, and the line had snapped. Nimu said nothing, and looked at the engravings, at Ciri and the unicorn.
I really have seen in a dream what I've been talking about, she finally said very calmly. I saw it many times in my dreams, and once while awake.
As it is known, the journey from Chuhos to Malbuk may in certain conditions take even 5 days, and since the letters from the Chuhos commander to Winrich von Kniprod Grand Master of the Order, had without fail to reach the addressee no later than on the day of Pentecost. The knight, Heinrich von Schwelborn, didn't delay and set off the day after Sunday, Exaudi Domine, in order to travel peacefully and with no risk of being late, langsam aber sicher. The knight's attitude greatly pleased his escort, which consisted of 6 mounted crossbowmen commanded by Hasso Planck, a baker's son from Cologne. The crossbowmen and Planck were more accustomed to noble gentlemen who swore, yelled, urged and ordered them to gallop at breakneck speed, and afterwards, when they didn't make it in time anyway, put all the blame on the poor infantry by lying in a way unbefitting a knight, not to mention one from a religious military order. It was warm, though overcast. It drizzled from time to time, and the ravines were enveloped in fog. The hills, overgrown by lush greenery, reminded Sir Heinrich of his native Thuringia, his mother, and the fact that he hadn't had a woman for over a month. The crossbowmen riding at the rear were languidly singing a ballad by Walter von der Vogelweide. Hasso Planck was dozing in the saddle. Wer gute Frau a Liebe hat, der schämt sich aller Misetat. The journey was proceeding peacefully, and who knows, perhaps it would have been peaceful all the way, had Sir Heinrich not noticed the glistening surface of a lake down below around noon. And because the following day was Friday, and it behoved them to get in holy day food in advance, the knight ordered his men to ride down to the water and look around for a fisherman's homestead. The lake was large, and there was even an island on it. No one knew its name, but it was probably called Holy Lake. In this pagan land, as if in mockery, every second lake was called Holy. Their horseshoes crunched on the shells lying on the shore. Fog hung over the lake, but it was obvious it was uninhabited. There was no sign of a boat, nor a net, nor any living soul. We'll have to search elsewhere, thought Heinrich von Schwelborn. And if not, too bad. We'll eat what we have in our saddlebags, even if that means smoked bacon. And in Malbork, we'll make our confession, the chaplain will demand a penance, and the sin will be absolved. He was about to issue an order when something buzzed in his head under his helmet, and Hasso Planck yelled horrifyingly. Von Schwelborn looked and was struck dumb, and crossed himself. He saw 2 horses, one white and the other black. A moment later, though, he noticed in horror that the white horse had a spirally twisted horn on its domed forehead. He also saw that a girl was sitting on the black, her ashen hair combed so as to obscure her cheek. The group apparition seemed not to be touching either the ground or the water. It looked as though it were suspended above the fog, trailing over the surface of the lake. The black horse neighed. "Whoops," said the girl with the grey hair quite distinctly. "You're a lucky you're dead. Squeeze me." "Saint Ursula, oh my patron," mumbled Hasso, white as a sheet. The crossbowman froze open-mouthed and made the sign of the cross. Von Schwelborn also crossed himself, after which, with a trembling hand, he drew a sword from a scabbard strapped under his saddle flap. "Heilige Maria, Mutter Gottes," he roared. "Steh mir bei." That day, Sir Heinrich didn't shame his valiant ancestors, the von Schwelborns, including Dietrich von Schwelborn, who had fought bravely at Damietta, and was one of the few not to run away when the Saracens conjured up and set a demon on the Crusaders. After spurring his horse and having recalled his fearless forebear, Heinrich von Schwelborn charged the apparition among the fresh water mussels splashing up from under his horse's hooves. "For the Order and St. George!" The white unicorn reared up like a heraldic emblem. The black mare danced, and the girl was alarmed, it was clear at first glance. Heinrich von Schwelborn rode on. Who knows how it all would have ended if the fog hadn't suddenly been blown towards him, and the image of the strange group dissolved, disintegrating into a myriad of colours like a stained glass window smashed by a stone. And everything vanished. Everything. The unicorn, the black horse, and the strange girl. Heinrich von Schwelborn's steed rode into the lake with a splash, stopped, tossed its head, neighed, and ground its teeth on the bit. Hasso Planck, struggling to control his unruly horse, rode over to the knight. Von Schwelborn was huffing and puffing, almost wheezing, goggled-eyed like a fast-day fish. "On the bones of St. Ursula, St. Cordula, and all the 11,000 virgin martyrs of Cologne," Hasso Planck stammered out. "What was it, noble Herr Ritter? A miracle? A revelation?" "Teufelswerk!" von Schwelborn grunted, only now blanching horrifyingly and chattering his teeth. Schwarze Magie, Zauberei, a damned pagan devilish matter. We ought to get out of here, sire, as quickly as possible. It's not far from Pelplin. Anything to get within the sound of church bells. Sir Heinrich looked back for the last time on a rise just outside the forest. The wind had blown away the fog, and the shining surface of the lake had grown dull and rippled in the places not obscured by the wall of trees. A great osprey circled above the water. Godless pagan land, muttered Heinrich von Schwelborn. Much work, much hardship and labour await us before the order of the Teutonic Knights will finally drive the devil from this nest of Slavs. Little horse, said Ciri reproachfully and sneeringly at once. I don't want to be intrusive, but I'm in a bit of a hurry to get back to my world. My friends and family need me. You know that, don't you? And first we end up by some lake with a ridiculous boar in checkered clothes, then run into a pack of filthy, yelling shaggy heads with clubs, and finally on a madman with a black cross on his cloak. They're the wrong times, the wrong places. Please, do try a bit harder, I beg you. Ihuarhuax neighed, nodded his horned head, and communicated something to her. A clever thought. Ciri didn't quite understand. She didn't have time to ponder, since the inside of her skull was filled with cool brightness. Her ears buzzed, and her nape tingled, and black and very soft nothingness engulfed her again. Nimu, laughing joyously, dragged the man by the hand. The two of them ran down to the lake, winding their way among the young birches and alders, among stumps and blown-down trees. After running onto the sandy beach, Nimu threw off her sandals, lifted up her dress, and splashed around in bare feet in the water by the shore. The man also took off his boots, but was in no hurry to enter the water. He removed his cloak and spread it out on the sand. Nimu ran over, threw her arms around his neck, and stood on tiptoes to kiss it. The man had to lean over a long way in any case. Not without reason was Nimu called Squirt. But now that she was 18 and was a novice of the magical arts, the privilege of using that epithet was exclusively reserved for her closest friends. And some men. The man, his mouth clamped on Nimu's, put his hand down the front of her dress. It moved fast after that. The two of them ended up on the cloak spread out on the sand. Nimu's dress up above her waist, her thighs powerfully gripping the man's hips, and her hands digging into his back. When he took her, too impatiently as usual, she clenched her teeth, but quickly caught up with him in excitement, drew level, and kept up with him. She was skilled. The man was uttering amusing sounds. Nimu observed fantastic shapes of the cumuli slowly gliding across the sky over his shoulder. Something rang as a bell submerged at the bottom of the ocean rings. There was a sudden buzzing in Nimu's ears. Magic, she thought. Turning her head, freeing herself from under the cheek and shoulder of the man lying on her. A white unicorn stood by the lakeshore, literally suspended above the surface. Beside it was a black horse, and in the saddle of the black horse was sitting... But I know that legend. The thought flashed through Nimu's head. I know that fairy tale. I was a child, a little child when I heard that tale. The wandering storyteller, the beggar Pogvist, had told it to her. The witch's Ciri, with a scar on her cheek, the black mare Kelpie, unicorns, the land of the elves. The movements of the man, who hadn't noticed the phenomenon at all, became more and more urgent, and the sounds he was uttering more and more amusing. Whoops, said the girl on the black mare. Another mistake. It's not this place, not this time. And what's more, I see it's a bad time. I'm sorry. The image blurred and shattered, as painted glass shatters, suddenly fell to pieces, disintegrated in a rainbow-coloured twinkling of sparkles, gleaming in gold. And then all of it vanished. No! Screamed Nimu. No! Don't disappear! I don't want you to go! She straightened her knees and tried to free herself from under the man, but she could not. He was stronger and heavier than her. The man groaned and moaned. Oh, Nimu, oh.
Nemo screamed and dug her teeth into his shoulder. They lay on his sheepskin coat, quivering and hot. Nemo looked at the lakeshore, at the caps of foam whipped up by the waves, at the reeds bent over by the wind, at the colourless, hopeless void. The void left by the disappearing legend. A tear trickled down the novice's nose. Nemo, is something the matter? Yes. She cuddled up to him, but carried on looking at the lake. Don't say anything. Hold me, and don't say anything. The man smiled proudly. I know what happened, he said boastfully. Did the earth move? Nemo smiled sadly. Not just the earth, she replied after a moment's silence. Not just the earth. A flash. Darkness. The next place. The next place was tenebrous, baleful and foul. Ciri involuntarily hunched over in the saddle, shaken, both in the literal and the metaphorical sense of the term. For Kelpie's horseshoes had thudded against something as painfully hard, flat and unyielding as rock. After a long time of gliding in very soft limbo, the impression of hardness was so astonishing and unpleasant that the mare neighed and suddenly lunged aside, beating out a staccato rhythm on the ground that made Ciri's teeth chatter. The second shock, the metaphorical one, was supplied by the smell. Ciri groaned and covered her mouth and nose with her sleeve. She felt her eyes immediately filling with tears. All around rose a sour, acrid, thick and glutinous stench, a smell of burning both choking and dreadful, impossible to define, resembling nothing Ciri had ever smelled. It was, she was certain of it, the stench of decay, a corpse-like reek of final degradation and degeneration, the odour of disintegration and destruction. In addition, there was the impression that whatever was decaying hadn't smelled any more pleasantly when it was alive, not even when it had been in its salad days. She bent over in a nauseous reflex she was unable to control. Kelpie snorted and shook her head, contracting her nostrils. The unicorn, which had materialized beside them, leaned back on his haunches, jumped up and kicked. The hard ground answered with a shock and a loud echo. All around was the night, the dark and filthy night, muffled by the sticky and reeking tatters of darkness. Ciri glanced upwards, searching for the stars, but there was nothing above her, only an abyss, lit up in places by an indistinct red glow like a distant fire. Whoops, she said and grimaced, feeling the sour and rotten mist settling on her lips. Yuck! Not this place. Not this time, under no circumstances. The unicorn snorted and nodded his head, his horn describing a short and dynamic arc. The ground, grinding beneath Kelpie's hooves, was rock, but strange, unnaturally smooth, emitting an intensive stench of burning and dirty ash. It took some time for Ciri to realize that what she was looking at was a road. She had had enough of that unpleasant and annoying hardness. She guided the mare to the side of the road, marked by something that had once been trees, but were now hideous and naked skeletons. Corpses hung with shreds of rags, quite like the remains of rotten shrouds. The unicorn gave a warning by neighing and sending a mental signal. Too late. Just beyond the strange road and the dead trees, a heap of scree began, and further away at its edge, a steep slope running downwards, almost a precipice. Ciri yelled, stuck her heels into the sides of the mare as she slipped down. Kelpie jerked, crushing whatever the heap was made of under her hooves. And it was waste, mostly some kind of strange pots. The vessels didn't crumble under the horseshoes, didn't crunch, but burst repulsively softly and stickily like great fishes' bladders. Something squelched and gurgled, and the odour belching forth almost knocked Ciri from the saddle. Kelpie, neighing wildly, trampled through the rubbish dump, struggling back upwards towards the road. Ciri, choking from the stench, grabbed the mare's neck. They managed to get up,
and greeted the weird road's disagreeable hardness with joy and relief. Ciri, trembling all over, looked down onto the rubbish dump, which ended in a black lake filling the bottom of the basin. The surface of the lake was lifeless and gleaming, as it wasn't water, but solidified pitch. Beyond the lake, beyond the rubbish dumps, the piles of ash and heaps of cinders, the sky was red from distant glows and was marked by trails of smoke. The unicorn snorted. Ciri was about to wipe her watering eyes with her cuff when she suddenly noticed that her entire sleeve was covered in dust. The flecks of dust also covered her thighs, the pommel of her saddle, and Kelpie's mane and neck. The stench was stifling. "Disgusting," she muttered. "Repulsive. I feel like I'm sticky all over. Let's get out of here. Let's get out of here with all haste, little horse." The unicorn pricked up his ears and snorted. "Only you can make it happen. Act. Me? All alone? Without your help?" The unicorn nodded his horned head. Ciri scratched her head, sighed, and shut her eyes. She focused. At first, there was only disbelief, resignation, and fear. But a cool brightness, the brightness of knowledge and power, quickly came over her. She had no idea where the knowledge and power were coming from, where their roots and source originated. But she knew she could do it, that she would do it if she wanted. Once more she cast a glance at the hardened and lifeless lake, the smoking heap of refuse, and the skeletons of trees. The sky was lit up by a distant glow. "I'm glad it's not my world." She leaned over and spat. "Very glad." The unicorn neighed meaningfully. She understood what he wanted to say. "Even if it's mine." She wiped her eyes, mouth, and nose with a handkerchief. "It's at once not mine, because it's far away in time. It's the past, or—" She broke off. "The past," she repeated softly. "I deeply believe it's the past." They greeted the heavy rain, the proper downpour they fell under in the next place, as a blessing. The rain was warm and aromatic, smelling of summer, weeds, mud, and compost. The rain washed the filth from them, purged them. The rain was quite simply a catharsis. Like any catharsis, it also became monotonous, excessive, and unbearable after a short while. After some time, the water she was washing herself in began to wet her annoyingly, run down her neck and chill her unpleasantly. So they got out of that rainy place, for it wasn't that place either, or that time. The next place was very warm, the weather very hot, so Ciri, Kelpie, and the unicorn dried off and steamed like 3 kettles. They found themselves on some sweltering moors at the edge of a forest. At once it could be deduced it was a very large forest, quite simply a dense, wild, and inaccessible wilderness. Hope that it might be Brokilon forest thumped in Ciri's heart, the hope that at last it might be a familiar and appropriate place. They rode slowly along the edge of the forest. Ciri was looking out for something that might serve as a sign. The unicorn snorted, raised his head and horn, and looked around. It was anxious. "Do you think, little horse," she asked, "that they might be following us?" A snort, comprehensible and unambiguous, even without telepathy. "We haven't managed to flee far enough away yet." She didn't understand what he telepathically told her in answer. There was no far or near? A spiral? What spiral? She didn't understand what he was talking about, but the anxiety infected her. The scorching moors weren't the right place or the right time. They understood it in the early evening, when the heat eased off, and instead of 1, 2 moons rose in the sky above the forest. One large, the other small. The next place was a seashore, a steep cliff from which they saw breakers crashing against strangely shaped rocks. They smelled the sea wind, and terns, black-headed gulls, and petrels screeched, covering the ledges of the cliff in a restless white layer. The sea reached all the way to the dark, cloudy horizon. Down below on the rocky beach, Ciri suddenly noticed the skeleton of a gigantic fish with a horrendously huge head partly buried in the shingles. Its great teeth, bristling in its sun-bleached jawbones, were at least 3 spans long, and it seemed one could have ridden a horse into its maw and easily paraded under the portals of its ribs without knocking one's head against its spine. Ciri wasn't certain if fish like that existed in her world and her time. They rode along the edge of the cliff, and the seagulls and albatrosses weren't frightened at all, reluctantly moving out of their way. Why? They even tried hard to peck and pinch the feathers on Kelpie and Ihuarhuax's fetlocks. Ciri instantly understood that the birds had never seen a human or a horse or a unicorn. Ihuarhuax snorted, shook his head and horn, clearly anxious. It turned out he had reason to be. Something creaked, just like canvas being torn. The terns rose with a cry and a fluttering, for a moment covering everything in a white cloud. The air above the cliff suddenly vibrated and became blurred like glass with water spilled over it. And then it shattered like glass, and darkness poured out of the rupture, while riders spilled out of the darkness. Around their shoulders fluttered cloaks whose vermilion amaranth crimson colour brought to mind the glow of a fire in a sky lit up by the blaze of the setting sun. De Gruathri, the red horseman. Even before the crying of birds and the neighing of the unicorn had died away, Ciri had reined her mare around and spurred her into a gallop. But the air also ruptured in another place, and from the rupture, cloaks fluttering like wings, rushed out more horsemen. The semicircle of the noose closed, pressing them against the cliff. Ciri cried out, jerking Swallow out of its scabbard. The unicorn summoned her with a sharp signal that penetrated her brain like a needle. She understood at once this time. He was showing her the way, a gap in the circle. He meanwhile reared up, neighed piercingly, and charged at the elves with his horn lowered menacingly. "Little horse! Save yourself, Star-Eye. Don't let them catch you." She pressed herself against Kelpie's mane. 2 elves barred her way. They had lassos, nooses on long shafts. They tried to throw them over Kelpie's neck. The mare nimbly twisted her head out of reach of one, but didn't slow her gallop for a second. Ciri severed the other noose with a single flourish of her sword and urged Kelpie with a cry to run quicker. The mare flew like a hurricane. But others were now hard on their heels. She could hear their cries, the thud of their hooves, the flapping of their cloaks. What about Little Horse? She thought. What have they done to him? There was no time for reflection. The unicorn was right. She couldn't let them capture her again. She had to dive into space, hide, and lose herself in the labyrinth of places and times. She focused, sensing with horror that all she had in her head was a void and a strange, ringing, quickly growing hubbub. "They're casting a spell on me," she thought. "They want to beguile me with witchcraft. Over my dead body. Spells have a range. I won't let them get close to me. Run, Kelpie!" The black mare stuck out her neck and flew like the wind. Ciri flattened herself on her neck to minimize air resistance. The cries from behind her back, a moment earlier still loud and dangerously close, faded, drowned out by the screaming of frightened birds. Then they became harder and harder to make out. Remote. Kelpie flew like a hurricane, so fast the sea wind howled in her ears. A note of fury sounded in the distant shouts of the pursuers. They understood they couldn't keep up, that they had no chance of catching up with the black mare, who was running without any sign of fatigue, as light, soft, and supple as a cheetah. Ciri didn't look back, but she knew they continued to pursue her for a long time, even though it was futile, until the moment their own horses began to wheeze and rasp, stumble and lower their foaming muzzles almost to the ground, teeth bared. Only then did they quit, sending after her nothing but curses and impotent threats she could no longer hear. Kelpie flew like a gale. The place she fled to was dry and windy. The keen, howling wind quickly dried the tears on her cheeks. She was alone. Alone again. All alone. A wanderer.
a permanent vagabond, a sailor lost on the boundless sea among the archipelago of places and times. A sailor losing hope. The gale whistled and howled, rolling balls of dried weeds over the cracked earth. The gale dried her tears. Inside her skull, cool lucidity. In her ears, a buzzing. A monotonous buzzing, like from the twisted interior of a sea conch. A tingling in her nape. Black and very soft nothingness. A new place. Another place. An archipelago of places. "This night," said Nimu, wrapping herself up in a fur, "will be a good night. I sense it." Conwirimure didn't comment, although she had already heard similar assurances a good few times. For it wasn't the first evening they had sat on the terrace, the lake blazing with a sunset in front of them, and behind them the magical looking-glass and magical tapestry. The curses of the Fisher King reached them from the lake, multiplied by the echo rolling across the water. The Fisher King was often in the habit of using vivid language to emphasize dissatisfaction with his angling failures, the unsuccessful strikes, plays, landings, and other techniques he used. It had gone particularly badly that evening, judging from the strength and repertoire of the oaths. "Time," said Nimu, "has neither a beginning nor an end. Time is like the serpent Ouroboros, which bites its own tail with its teeth. Eternity is hidden in every moment, and eternity consists of the moments that create it. Eternity is an archipelago of moments. You may sail through that archipelago, although navigation is very difficult, and it is dangerous to get lost. It's good to have a lighthouse whose light can guide you. It's good to be able to hear someone calling among the fog." She fell silent for a while. "How does the legend that interests us end? It seems to us, to you and me, that we know how it ends. But Ouroboros is still grasping its own tail in its teeth. Yes, how the legend ends is being settled now, at this moment. The ending of the legend will depend on whether and when the sailor lost among the archipelago of moments sees the lamp of the lighthouse. If she hears the calling." A curse, a splash, and the banging of oars in the rowlocks could be heard from the lake. "It will be a good night tonight. The last before the summer solstice. The moon is getting smaller. The sun is passing from the third to the fourth house, to the sign of the goatfish. The best time for divination. The best time." Focus, Conwirimures. Conwirimures, as so many times before, obediently focused, slowly entering a state close to a trance. "Search for her," said Nimu. "She is somewhere among the stars, among the moonlight, among the places. She is there. She is awaiting help. Let's help her, Conwirimures." Concentration. Fists at her temples. A buzzing in her ears as though from the inside of a conch. A flash. And abruptly, soft and black nothingness. There was a place where Ciri saw burning pyres. The women, bound by chains to stakes, howled wildly and horrifyingly for mercy, and the crowd gathered around, roared, laughed, and danced. There was a place where a great city was burning, roaring with fire and bursting with flames from collapsing roofs, and black smoke hooded the whole sky. There was a place where enormous two-legged lizards fought one another, and garish blood gushed from beneath fangs and claws. There was a place where hundreds of identical white windmills threshed the sky with their slender sails. There was a place where hundreds of snakes hissed and squirmed on stones, scraping and rustling their scales. There was a place where there was darkness, and in the darkness, voices, whispers, and terror. There were even more places, but none of them was the right one. She was finding moving from place to place so easy that she began to experiment. One of the few places she wasn't afraid of was those warm moors at the edge of the wild forest above which 2 moons rose. Calling forth in her memory the sight of those moons and repeating in her mind what she wanted, Ciri focused, strained, and plunged into the nothingness. She succeeded at the second attempt. Now encouraged, she decided to attempt an even more daring experiment. It was obvious that aside from places, she also visited times. Visigotta had talked about that, as had the elves, and the unicorns had mentioned it. Why, she had managed, albeit unwittingly, to do it before. When she had been wounded in the face, she had escaped from her persecutors into time, jumped forward 4 days, and then Visigotta couldn't account for those days. Nothing added up for him. Perhaps that was her chance. A leap into time? She decided to try. The burning city, for example, couldn't be burning permanently, could it? And if she were to get there before the fire, or after it? She landed almost in the center of the fire, scorching her eyebrows and eyelashes and arousing horrendous panic amongst the victims of the fire fleeing from the blazing city. She escaped to the friendly moors. It probably wasn't worth taking a risk like that, she thought. The devil only knows how it might end. I do better with places, so I'll stick to places. Let's try to get to places. Familiar places, ones I remember well, and ones I have pleasant associations with. She began with the Temple of Melitele, imagining the gate, the building, the grounds and the workshop, the novices' dormitory, and the rooms where Yennefer lived. She concentrated with her fists against her temples, evoking in her memory the faces of Nenneke, Euronid, Katya, and Iola II. Nothing came of it. She found herself in some swamps, shrouded in mist and swarming with mosquitoes, resounding with the whistling of turtles and the deafening croaking of frogs. She tried in turn, with no better result, Caer Morhen, the Isles of Skellige, and the banks in Gorsvelen, where Fabio Sachs worked. She didn't dare to try Sintra, knowing that the city was occupied by Nilfgaardians. Instead, she tried Vizima, the city where she and Yennefer used to go shopping. Eorhenius Krantz, sage, alchemist, astronomer, and astrologer, fidgeted on a hard stool with his eye stuck to the eyepiece of a telescope. The comet of great size and power, which it had been possible to observe in the sky for almost a week, merited observation and research. A comet like that, as Eorhenius Krantz knew, with a fiery red tail, usually heralded great wars, conflagrations, and massacres. Now, to tell the truth, the comet had been a bit late with its prophecy, because the war with Nilfgaard was well underway, and one could already have prophesied conflagrations and massacres correctly, without hesitation, for not a day went by without them. Eorhenius Krantz, who was familiar with the movements of heavenly bodies, was, however, hoping to calculate when, in how many years or centuries, the comet would appear again, announcing another war, which, who knows, it would perhaps be possible to prepare for better than the present one. The astronomer stood up, massaged his backside, and went to relieve his bladder from the terrace through the small balustrade. He always pissed straight from the terrace onto a bed of peonies, not caring at all about the housekeeper's reprimands. It was quite simply too far to the privy. Wasting time walking a long way to relieve himself bore the risk of the loss of valuable reflections, which no scholar could afford to do. He stood by the balustrade and undid his trews, looking at the lights of Vizima reflected in the lake. He sighed with relief and raised his eyes heavenwards. Stars, he thought, and constellations. The Winter Maiden, the 7 Goats, the Pitra. According to some theories, they aren't just little twinkling lights, but worlds. Other worlds. Worlds from which time and space separate us. I believe deeply, he thought, that one day journeys to those other places, to those other times and universes will be possible. Yes, it will certainly be possible one day. A way will be found. But it will demand utterly new thinking, a new, original idea that will tear apart the rigid corset called rational cognition that restricts it today. Ah, he thought, hopping, if only it could be achieved. If only one could experience inspiration. If there could be one unique opportunity.
Something flashed below the terrace. The darkness of the night ruptured like a starburst, and a horse emerged from the flare, with a rider on its back. The rider was a girl.
"Good evening," she greeted him politely. "I'm sorry if it's a bad time. May one know what place this is, and what time?"
Arrhenius Krantz swallowed, opened his mouth, and mumbled.
"The place,"
the girl repeated patiently and clearly.
"The time?"
The horse snorted. The girl sighed. "Well, it must be the wrong place again. The wrong place, the wrong time. But answer me, fellow, with at least one comprehensible word. For I can't be in a world where people have forgotten articulate speech."
One little word?
Then bugger you stupid old goat," said the girl, and vanished, along with the horse. Arrhenius Krantz closed his mouth. He stood for a while by the balustrade, staring into the night, at the lake and the distant lights of Ichima reflected in it. Then he buttoned up his trousers and returned to his telescope. The comet swiftly flashed across the sky. One ought to observe it, not let the eyepiece and eye lose sight of it. Track it until it disappeared into the chasms of the universe. It was an opportunity, and a scholar cannot waste such an opportunity.
"Perhaps I could try from another direction," she thought, staring at the two moons above the moor, now visible as two crescents, one small, the other large and less crescent. "Perhaps not imagine places or faces," she thought, "but strongly wish for something very strongly, right from my belly. What harm is there in trying? Geralt. I want to go to Geralt. I very much want to go to Geralt." "Oh no!" she cried. "Where have I bloody ended up now?"
Kelpie confirmed that she thought the same by whinnying, belching steam from her nostrils and scraping her snowbound hooves. The blizzard whistled and moaned, blinding them. Sharp snowflakes stung her cheeks and hands. The cold chilled her to the marrow, nipped her joints like a wolf. Ciri trembled, hunching her shoulders and hiding her neck in the meagre, non-existent protection of her turned-up collar. To the left and right rose majestic, menacing peaks, grey, glazed monuments whose summits vanished somewhere high up in the fog and blizzard. A swift, very swollen river, dense with frasil and lumps of ice, sped along the bottom of the valley. It was white all around, and cold. "So much for my abilities," thought Ciri, feeling the inside of her nose freezing. "So much for my power. A fine master of the worlds. Well. I wanted to go to Geralt, and I ended up in the middle of some bloody wilderness, winter and blizzard. Come on, Kelpie. Move or you'll go numb." She grabbed the reins with fingers paralyzed by the frost. Gee up, girl. I know it's not the place it's meant to be. I'll soon get us out of here. We'll soon return to our warm moor. But I have to concentrate, and that may take some time. So move yourself. Come on, ride." Kelpie belched steam from her nostrils. The strong wind blew. Snow stuck to her face, melting on her eyelashes. The freezing snowstorm howled and whistled. "Look!" called Angoulême, out-shouting the blizzard. "Look there! There are tracks! Someone rode that way!" "What are you saying?" Geralt unwrapped the shawl he had wrapped around his head to protect his ears from frostbite. "What are you saying, Angoulême?" "Tracks! Hoofprints!" "A horse! Here!" Caer also had to shout. The blizzard intensified, and the river sans retour, it seemed, whooshed and roared even louder. "How could a horse get here?" "Look for yourselves!" "Indeed," commented the vampire, the only member of the company who wasn't displaying symptoms of being utterly frozen, since he was, for obvious reasons, just as insensitive to low as to high temperatures. Hoof prints? But are they horses? It's impossible for it to be a horse. Kair massaged his cheeks and nose hard. Not in the middle of nowhere. The tracks must have been left by some wild animal. Most probably a mouflon. Mouflon yourself? Yelled Angoulême. When I say a horse, I mean a horse. Milva, as usual, preferred practice to theory. She dismounted and bent over, pushing her fox-fur calpac back on her head. The pup's right, she decided after a moment. It's a horse. I think it's even shod, but it's hard to say. The blizzard has covered the tracks. It rode over there into that ravine. Ha! Angoulême banged her arms together briskly. I knew it. Somebody lives here, in the vicinity. Let's follow the trail. Perhaps we'll find some warm cottage or other. Perhaps they'll let us get warm. Perhaps they'll treat us to something. For certain, said Kaia with a sneer. Most probably a crossbow bolt. It would be most sensible to keep to our plan and the river, Regis decided in his most omniscient tone. Then we won't be at risk of getting lost. And further down the Sans Retour, there was meant to be a trapper's manufactory. There's a greater likelihood they'll put us up there. Geralt, what do you see? The Witcher said nothing, and fixed his eyes on the snowflakes swirling in the blizzard. We'll follow the tracks, he finally decided. Actually, began the vampire, but Geralt immediately interrupted him. Follow the hoof prints. Ride. They spurred their steeds, but didn't get very far. They ventured not more than a quarter of a furlong into a gorge. That's it. Angoulême stated a fact, looking at the quite smooth and virginal snow. Now you see it, now you don't. Like an elven circus. What now, Witcher? Kair turned around in the saddle. The tracks have ceased. They've been covered up by the blizzard. No, they haven't, Milva said. The blizzard doesn't reach here, in the canyon. What happened to the horse, then? The archer shrugged, huddled up in the saddle, pulling her head into her shoulders. Where's that horse? Kair wasn't giving up. Did it vanish? Evaporate? Or perhaps we imagined it. Geralt? What do you say? The gale howled above the ravine, whipping up and swirling the snow. Why? Asked the vampire, scrutinizing the Witcher intently. Did you order us to follow those tracks, Geralt? I don't know, he confessed a moment later. I felt something. Something touched me. Never mind what. You were right, Regis. Let's go back to the Sans Retour and keep by the river without any excursions or diversions that might end badly. According to what Reinhardt said, the real winter and bad weather only begin in the Malheur Pass. When we get there, we'll have to be sound in body. Don't just stand there, we're turning around. Without having cleared up what happened to that strange horse. What's there to explain? The Witcher said bitterly. The tracks were swept away and that's that. Anyway, maybe it really was a mouflon. Milva looked at him strangely, but refrained from comment. When they returned to the river, the mysterious tracks were no longer there either, for they had been covered up by wet snow. Thrasil was floating densely. Pieces of pack ice were swirling and turning around in the tin-grey current of the Sans Retour. I'll tell you something, Angoulême piped up, but promise you won't laugh. They turned around. In her woolen pom-pom hat pulled down over her eyes, with cheeks and nose red from the cold, wearing a shapeless sheepskin coat, the girl looked funny, a dead ringer for a small, plump kobold. I'll tell you something about those tracks. When I was with Nightingale in the Hansa, they said that during the winter, the Mountain King, leader of the ice demons, rides on an enchanted horse in the passes. To meet him face to face is certain death. What do you say to that, Geralt? Is it possible that anything, he interrupted her, anything's possible? On we go, company. Before us is the Malheur Pass. The snow lashed and whipped, the wind blew, and ice demons whistled and wailed amidst the blizzard.
Except the moor she'd landed on wasn't the one she knew, Ciri realized at once. She didn't even have to wait until evening. She was sure she wouldn't see the two moons. The forest along whose edge she rode was as wild and inaccessible as the other one, but differences could be seen. Here, for example, there were more birches and fewer beeches. She hadn't heard or seen any birds there, while there were great numbers of them here. There had only been sand and moss between the clumps of heather. Here, whole carpets of green club moss sprawled. Even the grasshoppers running from under Kelpie's hooves were somehow different here, somehow familiar. And then, her heart began beating harder. She saw a track, overgrown and neglected, leading into the forest. Ciri looked around carefully and made sure the strange track didn't go any further, that it ended here, that it didn't lead to the forest, but from it or through it. Without deliberating for long, she prodded the mare's sides with her heels and rode between the trees. I'll ride south, she thought. If I don't come across anything to the south, I'll turn around and ride in the opposite direction, beyond the moor. She trotted beneath a canopy of boughs, looking around attentively, trying hard not to overlook anything important. Because of that, she didn't overlook an old man peeping out from behind an oak tree. The old man, who was very short but not at all stooped, was dressed in a linen shirt and trews made from the same material. On his feet he had huge and very funny-looking bast slippers. In one hand he held a gnarled stick, and in the other a wicker basket. Ciri couldn't see his face precisely, for it was hidden by the frayed and drooping brim of a straw hat, from under which protruded a sunburnt nose and a tangled grey beard. "Fear not," she said. "I won't do you any harm." The grey-bearded man shifted his weight from one foot to the other and removed his hat. He had a round face flecked with liver spots, ruddy and not very wrinkled, thin eyebrows, and a small and very receding chin. His long grey hair was tied up on his nape in a queue, but the top of his head, meanwhile, was completely bald, as yellow and shiny as a pumpkin. She saw him looking at her sword, at the hilt extending above her shoulder. "Don't be afraid," she repeated. "No, oh," he said, mumbling a little. Oh, my young maiden. Forrest Graham's isn't afraid. He ain't one of those fearful types, oh no." He smiled. He had large, very protruding teeth because of a bad occlusion and receding jaw. It was because of that he mumbled so much. "Forrest Graham's ain't afraid of wanderers," he repeated, "or even brigands. Forrest Graham's is poor. He's a poor thing. Forrest Graham's is peaceful. He don't disturb no one, eh?" He smiled again. When he smiled, he seemed to be all front teeth. "And you, young lass, aren't you afraid of Forrest Graham's?" Ciri snorted. "I'm not. Just imagine. I'm not the fearful kind either." "Well, I never." He took a pace towards her, resting on his stick. Kelpie snorted. Ciri tugged on the reins. "She doesn't like strangers," she warned, "and she bites." "Forrest Graham's nose. Bad, unruly mare. Where are you riding from, miss? Where are you heading, may I ask?" "It's a long story. Where does this road lead?" "Don't you know that, miss?" "Don't answer questions with questions, if you don't mind. Where will that road take me? What place is this in any case? And what time is it?" The old man stuck his teeth out again, moving them like a koipu. "Hey, he mumbled. "Well, I never. What time, you ask, miss? Oh, I see you've travelled from far away to Forrest Graham's, miss." "From quite far away indeed." She nodded indifferently. "From other places and times," he completed a sentence. "Graham's knows. Graham's guessed." "What?" she asked, excited. "What did you guess? What do you know?" "Forrest Graham's knows much." "Speak." "Miss must be hungry." He stuck out his teeth. "Thirsty? Fatigued? If you want, miss, Forrest Graham's to take you to his cottage, feed you, give you drink, take you in." For a long time, Ciri hadn't had the time or the peace of mind to think about rest or food. Now the words of the strange old man tightened up her stomach,
knotted up her guts, and tied up her tongue. The old man observed her from under the brim of his hat. "Forrest Grams," he mumbled, "has meat in his cottage, has spring water, and has hay for the mare, the bad mare that wanted to bite good old Grams, hey? Everything is in Forrest Grams' cottage, and we'll be able to talk about other places and times. It's not far at all, oh no. Will the young traveller avail herself? Bump to stay and visit poor old Grams."
Ciri swallowed. "Lead on." Forrest Gramps turned around and shambled down a barely visible path among the thicket, measuring off the road with energetic swings of his stick. Ciri rode behind him, dipping her head under branches and reining Kelpie back. The mare was indeed determined to bite the old man, or at least eat his hat. In spite of his assurances, it wasn't near at all. When they got there, to a clearing, the sun was almost at its zenith. Gramps' cottage turned out to be a picturesque shack on stilts, with a roof that had clearly often been patched up using whatever happened to be to hand. The shack's walls were covered with hides resembling pigskin. In front of the cottage, there was a wooden construction shaped like a gallows, a low table, and a chopping stump with an axe stuck in it. Behind the cottage was a hearth made of stones and clay, with a large blackened cauldron on it.
"This is Forrest Grams' home."
The old man indicated with his stick, not without pride.
"Forrest Grams lives here. He sleeps here. He cooks victuals here, should he have something to cook. It's a hardship, a severe hardship to get victuals in the forest. Does Miss Wanderer like pearl barley?"
"She does." Ciri swallowed again. "She likes everything."
"With a bit of meat? With some grease? With scratchings?"
"Mm-hmm."
"And it don't look,"
Gramps shot her an appraising glance,
"that Miss has lately tasted meat and scratchings often. Oh no. You're skinny, Miss, skinny. Skin and bones. And what's that behind your back, Miss?"
Ciri looked around, taken in by the oldest and most primitive trick in the book. A terrible blow of the gnarled stick caught her right in the temple. Her reflexes helped only in that she raised her arm and her hand partly cushioned a blow capable of smashing her skull like an egg. But in any case, Ciri ended up on the ground, stunned, bewildered, and completely disorientated. Gramps, grinning, leapt at her and struck her again with the stick. Ciri once again managed to shield her head with her hands, with the result that both flopped down inertly. The left one was definitely injured, the metacarpals probably shattered. Gramps, leaping forward, attacked from the other side and whacked her in the stomach with his stick. She screamed, curling up into a ball. Then he stooped on her like a hawk, turned her over face downwards, and pinned her down with his knees. Ciri tensed up, kicked back hard, missing, then delivered a vicious blow with her elbow, this time hitting the target. Gramps roared furiously and smashed her in the back of the head with his fist so powerfully she lurched face first into the sand. He seized her by the hair on her nape and pressed her mouth and nose against the ground. She felt herself suffocating. The old man kneeled on her, still pressing her head against the ground, tore the sword from her back and cast it aside. Then he began to fiddle with his trousers. He found the buckle and unfastened it. Ciri howled, choking and spitting sand. He pushed her down harder, immobilizing her, entangling her hair in his fist. He tore her trousers off her with a powerful tug.
"Hey," he mumbled, wheezing, "and hasn't Grams got a nice bit of stuff? Oh, Grams hasn't had one like this for a long time."
Ciri, feeling the repulsive touch of his dry, claw-like hand, yelled with her mouth full of sand and pine needles.
"Lie still, miss."
She heard him slavering, kneading her buttocks.
"Grams isn't as young as he was. Not right away, slowly. But never fear. Gramps will do what's to be done. And then Gramps will eat his fill. Hey, his fill, lavishly."
He broke off, roared and squealed. Feeling that his grip had eased off, Ciri kicked, jerked, and leapt up like a spring, and saw what had happened. Kelpie, creeping up noiselessly, had seized Forrest Gramps in her teeth by his queue and almost lifted him into the air. The old man howled and squealed, struggled, kicked, and wriggled his legs,
finally managing to tear himself free, leaving the long grey lock of hair in the mare's teeth. He tried to grab his stick, but Ciri kicked it out of range of his hands. She was about to treat him to another kick where he deserved it, but her movements were hindered by her trousers being halfway down her thighs. Gramps made good use of the time it took her to pull them up one-handed. He was by the stump in a few bounds and jerked the axe from it, driving the determined Kelpie away with a swing. He roared, stuck out his awful teeth, and attacked Ciri, raising the axe to strike. "Gramps is gonna fuck you, miss," he howled wildly. "Even if Gramps has to chop you up into pieces first. It's all the same to Gramps if you're in one piece or in portions." She thought she'd cope with him easily. After all, he was a decrepit old geezer. She was very much mistaken. In spite of his enormous slippers, he jumped like a spinning top, hopped like a rabbit, and swung the axe with the bent handle like a butcher. After the dark and sharpened blade had literally grazed her several times, Ciri realized that the only thing that could save her was to run away. But she was rescued by a coincidence. Stepping back, she knocked her foot against her sword. She picked it up in a flash. "Drop the axe," she panted, drawing Swallow from the scabbard with a hiss. "Drop the axe onto the ground, you lecherous old man. Then, who knows, perhaps I'll spare your life and not cut you into pieces." He stopped. He was panting and wheezing, and his beard was disgustingly covered in saliva. He didn't drop his weapon, though. She saw savage fury in his eyes. "Very well." She swung her sword in a hissing moulinet. "Make my day." For a moment, he looked at her, as though not understanding. Then he stuck out his teeth, goggled, roared, and lunged at her. Ciri had had enough of fooling around. She dodged him with a swift half-turn and cut from below across both his raised arms above the elbows. Gramps released the axe from his bloodied hands, but immediately jumped at her again. She leapt aside and slashed him in the nape of the neck. More out of mercy than need, he would soon have bled to death from his 2 severed brachial arteries. He lay, fighting unbelievably hard not to give up his life, still writhing like a worm in spite of his cloven vertebrae. Ciri stood over him. The last grains of sand were still grating in her teeth. She spat them out, straight onto his back. He was dead before she finished spitting. The strange construction in front of the cottage, resembling a gallows, was equipped with iron hooks and a block and tackle. The table and chopping block were worn smooth, sticky with grease, and reeked horribly, like a shambles. In the kitchen, Ciri found a cauldron of the pearl barley he had offered her, swimming in grease, full of pieces of meat and mushrooms. She was very hungry, but something told her not to eat it. She only drank some water from a wooden pail and nibbled a small wrinkled apple. Behind the shack, she found a cellar with steps, deep and cool. In the cellar stood pots of lard. Something was hanging from the ceiling. The remains of a side of meat. She ran out of the cellar, stumbling on the steps as though devils were pursuing her, then fell over in some nettles, jumped up, and ran tottering over to the cottage, grabbing with both hands one of the stilts supporting it. Although she had almost nothing in her stomach, she vomited very spasmodically for a very long time. The side of meat hanging in the cellar belonged to a child. Led by the strong smell, she found a water-filled hollow in the forest, into which the prudent forest Gramps would throw scraps of what it wasn't possible to eat. Looking at the skulls, ribs, and pelvises sticking out of the ooze, Ciri realized with horror that she was only alive thanks to the ghastly old man's lecherousness, only owing to the fact that he had felt like frolicking. Had his hunger been more powerful than his despicable sexual urges, he would have hit her treacherously with the axe, not the stick. Suspended by the legs from the wooden gallows, he would have disemboweled and skinned her, dressed and divided her on the table, chopped her up on the chopping block. Although she was unsteady on her feet from giddiness, and her left hand was swollen, and pain was shooting through it, she dragged the corpse to the hollow in the forest and pushed it into the stinking slime among the bones of his victims. She returned, covered up the entrance to the cellar with branches and twigs, and the yard and entire small holding with brushwood. Then she meticulously set fire to it all from 4 sides. She only rode away once it had thoroughly caught fire, when the fire was raging and roaring satisfactorily, when she was certain that no rain showers would interfere with all traces of that place being obliterated. Her hand wasn't in such bad shape. It was swollen. Indeed, it hurt awfully, but probably no bones were broken. As evening approached, only one moon indeed rose. But somehow, strangely, Ciri didn't feel like considering this world hers, nor staying in it longer than need be.
"It'll be a good night tonight," murmured Nimue. "I can sense it."
Conwiramur sighed. The horizon blazed gold and red. There was a stripe of the same colour on the lake from the horizon to the island. They sat in armchairs on the terrace, with the looking-glass in the ebony frame and the tapestry depicting the old castle, hugging a rock wall behind them, looking at themselves in the mountain lake.
"How many evenings," thought Conwiramur, "how many evenings have we sat like this until dusk has fallen, and later, in the dark, without any results, just talking?"
It was getting cool. The sorceress and the novice covered themselves with furs. From the lake they heard the creaking of the rowlocks of Fisher King's boat, but they couldn't see it. It was obscured by the brilliance of the sunset. "I quite often dream," Conwiramur returned to their interrupted conversation, "that I'm in an icy wasteland, where there's nothing but the white of the snow and mounds of ice glistening in the sun. And there's a silence ringing in the ears, an unnatural silence. The silence of death." Nimue nodded, as though to indicate she knew what was meant, but she didn't comment.
"Suddenly," continued the novice, "suddenly I feel I can hear something, that I feel the ice tremble beneath my feet. I kneel down, rake aside the snow. The ice is as transparent as glass, as in some clear mountain lakes, when the pebbles at the bottom and the fish swimming can be seen through a layer 2 yards thick. In my dream, I can also see, although the layer of ice is dozens or perhaps hundreds of yards thick. It doesn't stop me seeing and hearing people calling for help. At the bottom, deep beneath the ice, is a frozen world."
Nimue didn't comment this time either.
"Of course, I know what the source of that dream is," continued the novice. "Eithlinna's prophecy, the infamous white frost, the time of frost and the wolfish blizzard. The world dying among the snows and ice, in order, as the prophecy says, to be born again centuries later, cleansed and better." "I believe deeply," said Nimue softly, "that the world will be born again. Whether into something better, not particularly." "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me. Didn't I mishear? Nimue, the white frost has already been prophesied thousands of times. Every time the winter is severe, it's been said that it has come. Right now, even children don't believe that any winter is capable of endangering the world." "Well, well, children don't believe. But I, just imagine, do." "Based on any rational premises?" asked Conwiramur with a slight sneer, "or only on a mystical faith in the infallibility of elven predictions?" Nimue said nothing for a long while, picking at the fur she was draped in. "The earth," she finally began in a slightly sermonizing tone, "has a spherical shape and orbits the sun. Do you agree with that? Or perhaps you belong to one of those fashionable sects that try to prove something utterly different." "No, I don't. I accept heliocentrism, and I agree with the theory of the spherical shape of the earth." "Excellent. You are sure then to agree with the fact that the vertical axis of the globe is tilted at an angle, and the path of the earth around the sun doesn't have the shape of a regular circle, but is elliptical?" "I learned about it, but I'm not an astronomer, so..." "You don't have to be an astronomer.
It's enough to think logically. The Earth circles the Sun in an elliptical-shaped orbit, and so, during its revolution, sometimes it's closer and sometimes further away. The further the Earth is from the Sun, the colder it is on it. That must be logical. And the less the world's axis deviates from the perpendicular, the less light reaches the northern hemisphere. That's also logical. Both those factors, I mean the ellipticalness of the orbit and the degree of tilt of the world's axis, are subject to changes, as can be observed, cyclical ones. The ellipse may be more or less elliptical, that is, stretched out and elongated, and the Earth's axis may be less or more tilted. Extreme conditions, as far as climate is concerned, are caused by a simultaneous occurrence of the two phenomena: the maximum elongation of the ellipse and only an insignificant deviation of the axis from the vertical. The Earth, orbiting the Sun, receives very little light and heat at the aphelium, and the polar regions are additionally harmed by the disadvantageous angle of tilt of the axis. Naturally. Less light in the northern hemisphere means the snow lies longer. White and shining snow reflects sunlight. The temperature falls even more. The snow lies even longer because of that. It doesn't melt at all in greater and greater stretches, or only melts for a short time. The more snow and the longer it lies, the greater the white and shining reflective surface. I understand. The snow's falling. It's falling, and there's more and more of it. So observe that masses of warm air drift with the sea currents from the south, which condense over the frozen northland. The warm air condenses and falls as snow. The greater the temperature differences, the heavier the falls. The heavier the falls, the more white snow that doesn't melt for a long time, and the colder it is. The greater the temperature difference, and the more abundant the condensation of the masses of air, I understand. The snow cover becomes heavy enough to become compacted ice, a glacier, on which, as we now know, snow continues to fall, pressing it down even more. The glacier grows. It's not only thicker and thicker, but it spreads outwards, covering greater and greater expanses, white expanses, reflecting the sun's rays. Conwirramures nodded, becoming colder, colder and even colder. The white frost prophesied by Islena. But is a cataclysm possible? Is there really a danger that the ice that has lain in the north forever will all of a sudden flow south, crushing, compressing and covering everything? How fast does the ice cap spread at the pole? A few inches annually? As you surely know, said Nemu, eyes fixed on the lake. The only port in the Gulf of Praxida that doesn't freeze is Pont Vanis. Yes, I'm aware. Enriching your knowledge, 100 years ago, none of the Gulf's ports used to freeze. 100 years ago, there are numerous accounts of it. Cucumbers and pumpkins used to grow in Talgar, and sunflowers and lupins were cultivated in Cairngorm. They aren't cultivated now, since their growth is impossible. It's simply too cold there. And did you know that there were once vineyards in Caedwyn? The wines from those vines probably weren't the best, because it appears from the surviving documents that they were very cheap. But local poets sang their praises anyway. Today, vines don't grow in Caedwyn at all, because today's winters, unlike the former ones, bring hard frosts, and a hard frost kills vines. It doesn't just retard growth, it simply kills, destroys. I understand. Yes, Nemu reflected. What more is there to add? Perhaps that it snows in Talgar in the middle of November and drifts south at a speed of more than 50 miles a day. That at the end of December and the beginning of January, snowstorms occur by the Alba, where still 100 years ago snow was a sensation. And that every child knows that the snows melt and the lakes thaw in April in our region, don't they? And every child wonders why that month is called April. The opening. Didn't it surprise you? Not especially, admitted Conwirramures. Anyway, at home in Vicovaro, we didn't say April, but false bloom, or in the Elven, Birka. But I understand what you're implying.
The name of the month comes from ancient times when everything really did bloom in April. Those distant times are all 120 years ago. That's virtually yesterday, girl. Eithlina was absolutely right. Her prophecy will be fulfilled. The world will perish beneath a layer of ice. Civilization will perish through the fault of the destroyer, who had the opportunity to open a path to hope. It is known from legend that she didn't. For reasons that the legend doesn't explain, or explains with the help of a vague and naive moral. That's true, but the fact remains a fact. The white frost is a fact. The civilization of the Northern Hemisphere is doomed to extinction. It will vanish beneath the ice of a spreading glacier, beneath permanent pack ice and snow. There's no need to panic, though, because it'll take some time before it happens. The sun had completely set, and the blinding glare had disappeared from the surface of the lake. Now a streak of softer, paler light lay down on the water. The moon rose over Innisvitra, as bright as a gold sovereign chopped in half. "How long?" Conwyrmurs asked. "How long, according to you, will it take? I mean, how much time do we have?" "A good deal." "How much, Nimu?" "Some 3,000 years." On the lake, the Fisher King banged his oar down in the boat and swore. Conwyrmurs sighed loudly. "You've reassured me a little," she said after a while. "But only a little." The next place was one of the foulest Ciri had visited. It certainly appeared in the top ranking and at the top of that ranking. It was a port channel. She saw boats and galleys by jetties and posts, saw a forest of masts, saw sails sagging heavily in the still air. Smoke, clouds of stinking smoke, were creeping and hanging all around. Smoke also rose from behind crooked shacks by the channel. The loud, broken crying of a child could be heard from there. Kelpie snorted, jerking her head sharply, and stepped back, banging her hooves on the cobbles. Ciri glanced down and noticed some dead rats. They were lying everywhere. Dead rodents contorted in agony with pale pink paws. "Something's not right here," she thought, feeling horror gripping her. "Something's wrong here. Get out of here. Run from here as quickly as possible." A man in a gaping shirt was sitting under hanging nets and lines, his head resting on his shoulder. A few paces away lay another. They didn't look as if they were asleep. They didn't even twitch when Kelpie's horseshoes clattered on the stones right next to them. Ciri bowed her head, riding under the rags hanging from washing lines and giving off an acrid odour of filth. There was a cross on the door of one of the shacks, painted in whitewash. Black smoke left a trail in the air behind the roof. The child was still crying. Somebody shouted in the distance. Somebody closer coughed and wheezed. A dog howled. Ciri felt her hand itching. She looked down. Her hand was flecked with the black dots of fleas like caraway seeds. She screamed at the top of her voice, shaking all over in horror and revulsion. She began to brush herself off, waving her arms wildly. Kelpie, alarmed, burst into a gallop, and Ciri almost fell off. Squeezing the mare's sides with her thighs, she combed and ran her fingers through her hair. She shook her jacket and blouse. Kelpie galloped into a smoke-enveloped alleyway. Ciri screamed with terror. She rode through hell, through an inferno, through the most nightmarish of nightmares. Among houses marked with white crosses, among smouldering piles of rags. Among the dead lying singly, and those who lay in heaps one upon the other, and among living, ragged, half-naked spectres with cheeks sunken from pain, grovelling through dung, screaming in a language she didn't understand, stretching out towards her bony arms, covered in horrible, bloody pustules. "Run! Run from here!" Even in the black nothingness, in the oblivion of the archipelago of places, Ciri could still smell that smoke and stench in her nostrils.
The next place was also a port. There was also a quay here, with a piled canal, busy with cogs, launches, and other craft, and above them a forest of masts. But here, in this place, above the masts, seagulls were cheerfully screeching, and it stank in a normal, familiar way, of wet wood, pitch, seawater, and also fish in all its 3 basic varieties, fresh, rotten, and fried. 2 men were arguing on the deck of a cog, shouting over each other in raised voices. She understood what they were saying. It was about the price of herrings. Not far away was a tavern. The odour of mustiness and beer and the sound of voices, clanking and laughter belched from the open door. Someone roared out a filthy song, the same verse the whole time. Luned vartele nahars in a mithil and spurs. She knew where she was, before she'd even read on the stern of one of the galleys, Evalmur, and its home port, Bachala. She knew where she was. In Nilfgaard. She fled before anyone could pay more close attention to her. But before she managed to dive into nothingness, a flea, the last of the ones that had crawled all over her in the previous place, that had survived the journey in time and space, nestled in a fold of her jacket, leapt a great flea leap onto the wharf. That same evening, the flea settled into the mangy coat of a rat, an old male, the veteran of many rat fights, testified to by one ear chewed off right by its skull. That same evening, the flea and the rat embarked on a ship, and the next morning set sail on a voyage, on a barge, old, neglected, and very dirty. The barge was called Katrina. That name was to pass into history, but no one knew that then. The next place, difficult though it was to believe, was a truly astonishingly idyllic scene. A thatched tavern grown over with wild vines, ivy and sweet peas stood among hollyhocks by a peaceful lazy river flowing among willows, alders and oaks bent over the water, right beside a bridge connecting the banks with its elegant stone arch. A sign with gilded letters on it swung over the porch. The letters were completely foreign to Ciri, but there was quite a well-executed picture of a cat, so she assumed it was the Black Cat Tavern. The scent of food drifting from the tavern was simply captivating. Ciri did not ponder for long. She straightened her sword on her back and entered. It was empty inside. Only one of the tables was occupied by 3 men with the appearance of peasants. They didn't even look at her. Ciri sat down in the corner with her back to the wall. The innkeeper, a corpulent woman in a perfectly clean apron and horned cap, approached and asked about something. Her voice sounded jangling but melodic. Ciri pointed a finger at her open mouth, patted herself on the stomach, after which she cut off one of the silver buttons on her jacket and laid it on the table. Seeing a strange glance, she set to cutting off another button, but the woman stopped her with a gesture and a hissing, though nicely ringing word. The value of a button turned out to be a bowl of thick vegetable soup, an earthenware pot of beans and smoked bacon, bread, and a jug of watered-down wine. Ciri thought she'd probably burst into tears at the first spoonful, but she controlled herself. She ate slowly, delighting in the food. The innkeeper came over, jingling questioningly, and laid her cheek on her pressed-together hands. Would she stay the night? "I don't know," said Ciri. "Perhaps. In any case, thank you for the offer." The woman smiled and went out into the kitchen. Ciri unfastened her belt and rested her back against the wall. She wondered what to do next. The place, particularly compared to the last view, was pleasant and encouraged her to stay longer. She knew, though, that excessive trust could be dangerous and lack of vigilance fatal. A black cat, exactly like the one on the inn sign, appeared from nowhere and rubbed against her calf, arching its back. She stroked it, and the cat gently butted her palm, sat down, and began licking the fur on its breast. Ciri gazed into space, her sight drifting elsewhere. She saw Yara sitting by the fireplace in a circle of some unattractive-looking scruffs. They were all knocking over small vessels containing a red liquid.
Yara? That's what you should do, said the boy, looking into the flames of the fire. I read about it in the History of Wars, a work written by Marshal Pellegrim. You should do that when the motherland is in need. What should you do? Spill blood? Yes, precisely. The motherland is calling, and partly for personal reasons. Ciri, don't sleep in the saddle, says Yennefer. We're almost there. There are large crosses painted in whitewash on the houses of the town they are arriving in, on all the doors and gates. Thick, reeking smoke. Smoke is billowing from pyres with corpses burning on them. Yennefer seems not to notice it. I have to make myself beautiful. A small mirror is floating in front of her face, over the horse's ears. A comb is dancing in the air, tugging through her black curls. Yennefer is using witchcraft. She doesn't use her hands at all, because her hands are a mass of clotted blood. Mummy, what have they done to you? Stand up, girl, says Cohen. Master your pain. Get up and onto the comb. Otherwise fear will seize you. Do you want to be dying of fear all your life? His yellow eyes shine unpleasantly. He yawns. His pointed teeth flash white. It's not Cohen at all. It's the cat. The black cat. A column of soldiers many miles long are marching. A forest of spears and standards sways and undulates over them. Yara also marches. He has a round helmet on his head and a pike on his shoulder so long he has to clutch it tightly in both hands, otherwise it would overbalance him. The drums growl and the soldiers' song booms and rumbles. Crows caw above the column. A mass of crows. A lakeshore. On the beach, white caps of whipped-up foam, rotten reeds washed up. An island on the lake. A tower. Toothed battlements, a keep thickened by the protrusions of machicolations. Over the tower, in the darkening blue of the sky, the moon shines, as bright as a gold sovereign chopped in half. 2 women wrapped in furs sit on the terrace. A man in a boat. A looking-glass and a tapestry. Ciri jerks her head up. Eredin Brechglas is sitting opposite on the other side of the table. You can't not know, he says, showing his even teeth in a smile, that you're only delaying the inevitable. You belong to us, and we'll catch you, like hell. You will return to us. You will roam a little around places and times, then you'll reach the spiral, and we'll catch you in it. You will never return to your world or time. It's too late in any case. There's nothing for you to return to. The people you knew died long ago. Their graves are overgrown and have caved in. Their names have been forgotten. Your name also. You're lying. I don't believe you. Your beliefs are your private matter. I repeat, you will soon reach the spiral, and I'll be waiting there for you. You desire that secretly, don't you, Mialina Lonet? You've got to be talking rubbish. We A&L sense things like that. You were fascinated by me. You desired me, and feared that desire. You desired me, and you still desire me, Zirael. Me, my hands, my touch. Feeling a touch, she leapt up, knocking over a cup, which was fortunately empty. She reached for her sword, but calmed down almost at once. She was in the Black Cat Inn. She must have dropped off, dozing on the table. The hand that had touched her hair belonged to the portly innkeeper. Ciri wasn't fond of that kind of familiarity, but kindness and goodness simply radiated from the woman, which she couldn't pay back with brusqueness. She let herself be stroked on the head and listened to the melodic, jingling speech with a smile. She was weary. I must ride, she said at last. The woman smiled, jingling melodiously. How does it happen? Thought Ciri. What can it be ascribed to? That in all worlds, places and times, in all languages and dialects, that one word always sounds comprehensible and always similar. Yes, I must ride to my mamma. My mamma is waiting for me. The innkeeper led her out into the courtyard. Before she found herself in the saddle, the innkeeper suddenly hugged Ciri hard, pressing her against her plump breast. Goodbye. Thank you for having me. Forward, Kelpie. She rode straight for the arched bridge over the tranquil river. When the mare's horseshoes rang on the stones, she looked around. The woman was still standing outside the inn. Concentration, fists at her temples, a buzzing in her ears as though from the inside of a conch. A flash, and abruptly, soft and black nothingness. Bonne chance, ma fille. Thérèse Lapin, the innkeeper of the tavern Au Chat Noir im Pensorion, cried after her by the highway running from Melun to Auxerre. Have a pleasant journey. Concentration, fists at her temples, a buzzing in her ears as though from the inside of a conch. A flash, and abruptly, soft and black nothingness. A place, a lake, an island. The moon like a sovereign hacked in half. Its light lies down on the water in a luminous streak. In the streak, a boat. On it, a man with a fishing rod. On the terrace of the tower, 2 women? Condwyrmures couldn't bear it and screamed in amazement, immediately covering her mouth with her hand. The Fisher King dropped the anchor with a splash, swore gruffly, and then opened his mouth and froze like that. Nemu didn't even twitch. The surface of the lake, bisected by a streak of moonlight, vibrated and rippled as though having been struck by a gale. The night air above the lake ruptured like a smashed stained glass window cracks. A black horse emerged from the crack, with a rider on its back. Nemu calmly held out her hands, chanting a spell. The tapestry hanging on the stand suddenly burst into flames, lighting up in an extravaganza of tiny multicolored lights. The tiny lights reflected in the oval of the looking-glass, danced, teemed in the glass like colored beads, and suddenly flowed out like a rainbow-colored apparition, a widening streak, making everything as bright as day. The black mare reared up and neighed wildly. Nemu spread wide her arms violently and screamed a formula. Condwyrmures, seeing the image forming and growing in the air, focused intently. The image gained in clarity at once. It became a portal. A gate, beyond which was visible a plateau full of shipwrecks. A castle embedded in the sharp rocks of a cliff, towering over the black-looking glass of a mountain lake. "This way!" Nemu screamed piercingly. "This is the way you must take, Ciri, daughter of Pavetta. Enter the portal. Take the road leading to your encounter with destiny. May the wheel of time close. May the serpent Ouroboros sink its teeth into its own tail. Roam no more. Hurry. Hurry to help your friends. This is the right way, O Witcher girl." The mare whinnied again, flailed the air with its hooves once more. The girl in the saddle turned her head, looking now at them, now at the image called up by the tapestry and the looking-glass. She brushed her hair aside, and Condwyrmures saw the ugly scar on her cheek. "Trust me, Ciri," cried Nemu, "for you know me. You saw me once." "I remember," they heard. "I trust you. Thank you." They saw the mare spurred on and running with a light and dancing step into the brightness of the portal. Before the image became blurred and dispersed, they saw the ashen-haired girl wave a hand turned towards them in the saddle. And then everything vanished. The surface of the lake slowly calmed. The streak of moonlight became smooth again. It was so quiet
They felt they could hear the Fisher King's wheezing breath. Holding back the tears welling up in her eyes, Conwyramures hugged Nemu tightly. She felt the little sorceress tremble. They remained in an embrace for some time, without a word. Then they both turned around towards the place where the Gate of the Worlds had vanished. "Good luck, Witcher girl," they cried in unison. "Good luck." Close by that field where the fierce battle took place, where almost the whole force of the North clashed with almost the entire might of the Nilfgaardian invader, were two fishing villages, Old Bottoms and Brenna. Because, however, Brenna was burned down to the ground at that time, it caught on at first to call it the Battle of Old Bottoms. Today, nonetheless, no one says anything other than the Battle of Brenna, and there are two reasons for that. Primo, after being rebuilt, Brenna is today a large and prosperous settlement, while Old Bottoms did not resist the ravages of time, and all trace of it was covered over by nettles, couch grass, and burdock. Secundo, somehow that name did not befit that famous, memorable, and, at the same time, tragic battle. For just ask yourself, here was a battle in which more than 30,000 men laid down their lives, and if Bottoms was not enough, they had to be old as well. Thus, in all the historical and military literature, it became customary only to write the Battle of Brenna, both in the North and in Nilfgaardian sources, of which, nota bene, there are many more than ours. The Venerable Yara of Ellender, the Elder, Annales Uchronicae Incliti Regni Temeriae,